Thank you for joining us today for our latest and our best practice webinar series. Today we have a special guest, Shawn Kent Hayashi, and she's going to be talking to us about creating star performers. You can see the slide there is the cover of her latest book, Conversations for Creating Star Performers. And just a little logistics before we get started. This is a listen-only webinar. It is being recorded, and a link to the session recording as well as a PDF of the deck will be sent to all registrants after the session. You can submit questions through the question panel of your GoToWebinar console, and Shawn will address your questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd also like to continue the discussion after the webinar, you can visit our LinkedIn discussion group and post questions and comments there. Just a little bit about Service Strategies. We are a global service improvement company. We provide training, consulting, industry standards, and certification that help companies deliver high-quality customer service and support. We focus on e-service, support, field service, and professional service operations. Our service capability and performance standards are recognized as the global benchmark of service excellence and have been deployed worldwide for the past 14 years. And at this point, we have over 2,000 service managers around the world that have been certified under our SCP Career Certification Program, as well as thousands more individual contributors. So with that, I'd like to introduce Shawn. And Shawn, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and then walk us through your presentation.
Thanks so much, Greg. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm Shawn Kent Hayashi, and primarily I work with managers, coaches, and leaders who want to develop star performers and teams. Perhaps the most important thing from your perspective about my background is that during a portion of my career for 5 years, I led a service organization that was affiliated with Service Strategies. We were able to earn our certification, and I was so proud of the individuals and the teams that developed in that organization. And it's my hope, I suspect a bunch of them are on the call today. I would love to connect with them. So my background really aligns probably very closely to some of yours in that leading service organizations is something that I'm very passionate about. Today, as we think about what it means to create conversations that develop your leaders, that develop stars on your team, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with my client Steve Hart from the Federal Reserve Bank. He said to me, energizing the soul at work and inspiring engagement is really about conversations. It's the quality of the conversations that leaders engage in with their employees that make the difference and that lead to highly productive teams. When I heard Steve say this, it got me thinking. And it caused me to begin to consider what happens when people don't know how to manage conversations to engage people. I frequently work with managers who are perplexed about what to say next and how to shape a conversation to engage and to create meaning. So when you need clarity about what to say next, you'll find that here. My promise to you is that if you apply what you learn here, you will be highly effective in creating the conversations that need to take place next in order to develop high performers and high-performing teams. As a way to introduce you to the idea of this, I'd like to have you meet 4 different managers. Nancy's a director in a marketing organization, and 6 months ago, a global company known as the world leader in its industry hired Nancy. Like her boss, this global giant organization aspired to be the best out there. You probably do too, since you're a part of this best practice webinar. But Nancy's new boss hired her because she saw this world-class drive in Nancy. She was hired to raise the bar in her department and further develop what the next level of excellence would look like. However, after a while, a challenge arose. Nancy's high standards for herself and her team members were causing trouble for Nancy in building peer relationships. Her peers saw her as a change agent, bringing in loads of unwanted new ideas to make what they referred to as busy work, by replacing processes that, in their opinion, had been working just fine. These peers were ready for Nancy to go back to where she had come from, which caused Nancy to reach out to me and ask for some coaching. She asked, how do I go about building strong relationships with my peers and team members so that they want to collaborate with me? Next, I'd like to introduce you to Victor. He's a vice president of finance. And after successfully holding 3 key positions in IT, market research, and customer service for a mid-sized company, Victor was promoted to be the vice president of finance. He was thrilled by the promotion and excited about making a difference for the company. Victor was known for his very strong analytical abilities. He could grasp the big picture and the details, easily seeing what would be needed in the future. 1 year into his new role, more than 60% of Victor's staff had resigned from the company, complaining in their exit interviews that his leadership style was the reason they decided to leave. Victor was shocked by this feedback and even more surprised when the Vice President of Human Resources told Victor that he needed to dramatically change his leadership style if he was going to be able to keep his employees and his current job. Victor had succeeded in every position he had ever been in, and this was the first time in his career that he was stumped and not sure what to do to resolve the issue. That's when Victor reached out and asked the question, show me how to fully engage staff members, team members, so that they're motivated by the work we do here. Angela was a senior director of operations. She had the respect of both her management and the large group of people who reported to her. She was confident that she was being developed to take on the vice president role when it came open soon. The person who was in the role had signaled to Angela that she was close to retiring. Angela was told several times by senior managers that she was a high potential performer who was going places. So she fully expected to be put into the VP role when it became available. So why didn't she receive the promotion? Well, there was no one ready to take Angela's position. That's right. Angela's organization hired from the outside for the VP opening because there was not someone already developed to take Angela's hands-on, task-oriented role, even though it was clear that Angela was the most qualified and ready for the more strategic leadership opportunity. The CEO explained to Angela that she needed to have people ready to take her role and that the new VP hired from the outside would be moved into a new position once Angela had her role covered. In other words, she could be promoted only after someone was successfully performing her current accountabilities. That's when Angela reached out and said, help me identify what skills someone needs to be successful in my role, and then identify the right people so we can develop them. And then there's Alex. Alex was the director of sales operations, and he had a team of about 10 people. And one of his team members was Bob. Both Alex and Alex's boss thought that Bob was not a good fit for the position that he was currently in. The key accountabilities in the role called for lots of customer interaction, customer service. But the person in that role needed to be someone who was socially outgoing and directive, someone who reached out to customers and interviewed them about their thinking and engaged them in discussions. But Bob was far more internally motivated. He was interested in data, facts, logic, and in interpreting research. He liked to interview and, he liked to review reports in his office, and he preferred doing internal kinds of projects rather than external things. A few weeks later, when I met with Alex and talked to him about what he was trying to accomplish, he said to me, I want to lead Bob to behave in a new way so that he can succeed in the role he's currently in. I want to show my boss that I can inspire my employees to make big changes and that they will make those changes to fit the demands of the position. As I listened to Alex, a red flag was waving in my mind. Want to know why? Each of these managers that I've just introduced you to have in common that they were missing a series of conversations. They were leaving out conversations that needed to occur in order for them and their teams to be high performing. I'd like you to do a little self-reflection here for a moment. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I just ask that you jot down your own initial first blush responses to these. Who do you serve by being a leader, a coach, a manager? Whom do you add value to by sharing your know-how, your direction, and your guidance? What would it look like for you to go to the next level in your own leadership? Do you believe that you can learn whatever you need to know? Next, I'd like you to imagine yourself having fun. What comes to mind? See a picture of yourself. The last time you had a really great time, what were you doing? And what causes you to want to perform well at work? Is there a correlation between what causes you to have fun and what causes you to want to perform well at work? Most of the time when I'm coaching people, they begin to see the link between the skills, the abilities, the thoughts that trigger them into feeling like they're having fun and the things that they do at work that cause them to want to perform well. I had the opportunity at an Odyssey of the Mind event to volunteer with a young man named John. And as I observed John doing his tasks throughout the day, he was not very service-oriented, even though the role we were given was to serve people. John seemed very detached, uninterested in what he was doing. At one point in the day, when there was a bit of a lull, I asked John about what motivated him and what would cause him to want to do a good job at work. And he told me that he was motivated when his boss was watching him or the girl that he had a crush on was watching him. He shared the girl he had a crush on was working in his office environment. I chuckled at that one. But it became clear to me that John's motivations were externally triggered. Contrast that to Olivia. I had the opportunity to work with Olivia, and I noticed that she was on her game board. She loved to serve people. She loved to make sure that she was offering the best quality possible. And when I asked her the same question that I asked John, she pulled out her own statement, her declaration of who she wanted to be. She said, I deliver outstanding service in everything I do. I remember that I have choices in everything I do. I'm aware of my feelings and I use them as a guide so that I can create positive experiences for other people as well. Are you more internally motivated or more externally motivated? Coaches, managers, are focused on engaging people in their own growth and learning so that they will become internally motivated, so that their internal motivations align with the work that they're doing. Coaches focus on building new skills that help people to be highly effective. They develop high potential performers for future roles. They help performers who want to achieve higher levels of success. And they look at ways to build effective teams. Coaches ask questions so that the reflective learning, like what I've just asked you, begins to occur. They also explain and demonstrate how to accomplish the desired goals. Being a great coach and manager requires knowing how to focus your team members on the right things to produce the right results. I think that self-reflection as a learning process is really important. So managers need really great questions to ask. I'd like you to think about some additional questions here for yourself. Who created a climate that caused your desire, or that changed your desire, so that you wanted to be the best version of you possible? Who did the opposite? Why were they able to do so? See if you can think of somebody. Jot a name down on a piece of paper right next to you. Somebody who really inspired you, and then somebody who squashed you. What did they do differently? How did you feel when you were with them? I would encourage you to create a list of descriptors of people who bring out the best in you, and another list of people who bring out the worst in you. And look at, what do they actually do differently? What are the behaviors that are different for them? Emotion is what causes change. If we trigger the parasympathetic nervous system or create a positive emotional wake with people, we are more likely to get positive results. Do you notice that in your own list, in your own experience? So, are you inspiring? Do you help people connect their long-term goals to the work they are doing today? You see, if we are helping people to recognize what their long-term goals are and how the actions that they're taking today will help them get there, we're going to be inspiring. And our emotional wake on other people spills over. So are you inspired in your work? If you're inspired in your work, chances are you're asking the right kinds of questions. You're role modeling the right kinds of things to help people to be inspired in their work as well. John Cotter in The Leadership Factor said 53% of leaders do not have the skills to do their job adequately. Most need to be coached to master how to build relationships that engage, develop, and inspire their employees. So what are the behaviors that really make a difference? When I do this as a workshop for organizations and I have people post their answers to the questions that I just asked you up on boards around the room, inevitably I see things like creating and maintaining ongoing conversations that communicate the purpose of the organization, having conversations that describe the key accountabilities and the expectations of each role, asking questions that cause people to explore and find the connection between their own motivation and the organization's purpose, inspiring hope and vision for new possibilities, having conversations that demonstrate compassion, understanding, empathy, paying attention to health and well-being in the body, the mind, and the spirit, maintaining an ongoing conversation for learning. That is, conversations that help employees increase their knowledge of their present role and their possible future roles. Having conversations that trigger feelings connected to why people are doing what they're doing. So, as a manager, as a leader, as a coach, how do you do all of this? Well, it's really about creating positive change. I think about a metaphor here, making scrambled eggs, for example. If I asked you today to make us some scrambled eggs, you could probably do it very confidently, right? You know that you take the egg and you crack it and it spills into the bowl and it doesn't look anything like what you're wanting it to look like, but you're confident because you know that it's a step in the process. You know that if you put the right seasonings in and you whisk it together and you take the next step, even though it doesn't look at all like what you want, you trust in the process of making scrambled eggs that now that it's this frothy mess, it's on the right path. And then you pour it in the skillet, and again, it doesn't look like what you want it to be, but you trust the process. You're not angry, you're not upset that it's not where it needs to be. You know you're on the right path because you've done it before. You have success in making scrambled eggs. Eventually, after a bunch of stirring goes on, you've gotten to where you want to be, and now you can sit down and enjoy, share your meal. To know what to expect at each stage in a change process, when we want to create positive change, we need to find a mentor or a coach who can guide us step by step. The very first time you made scrambled eggs, I'll bet you found yourself a little frustrated along the way, unless you had a coach, a guide, who you trusted, who you believed understood each step and what could be done with it. Are you the kind of manager, the kind of coach, the kind of leader who does this for others? Are you the kind of support service person who guides your customers through step by step, giving them the confidence in you at each step of the way so that positive change can occur? Have you noticed that people don't want to be fixed? People want to grow and learn, and there's a fine line between these two mindsets. A negative fix-it mindset tends to focus on fears and anger. It feels pessimistic, criticism-based. It might be about performance improvement plans and not meeting expectations. It's typically focused on problems versus a positive focus on development, inspiring growth in someone, having a vision of the ideal self, the ideal team, and moving in that direction, playing to strengths and ways that I contribute best, creating a development plan based on goals, and focused on creative solutions. In creating a vision of your ideal self that serves as an internal motivator for yourself, ask yourself the question, who do you want to be? What do you want your life to look like? What's your ideal view of yourself? What's on your "that's for me" list? I'm a big believer in creating a "that's for me" list where you identify at least 100 experiences, services, opportunities that you want to create in your life. And then what are the values that are most important to you? After you have your own answers to these questions, it's at that point that something like a 360-degree feedback tool can be helpful. Getting feedback from other people can be helpful after we've answered these questions for ourselves. Because then we can begin to see which new skills we may want to develop to help us achieve what's important, what's the next step in our growth. I'm a big believer in creating a learning journal so that you trigger for yourself continual learning. And as managers and leaders, you'll begin then to share your own stories about what you're learning, what's inspiring you. In Conversations for Creating Star Performers, you'll find questions on pages 14 and 15 that will guide you in beginning to create your own learning journal for this kind of self-reflection, the questions that I've been asking you here. It's important also then to reread what you've written in your learning journal. I encourage clients to do that at the end of every month. So what do you think were the missing conversations that the managers I introduced you to earlier skipped over in their relationship building around them? In Conversations for Creating Star Performers, I distinguish 10 different types of conversations that people need to know how to have in order to be successful as managers, leaders, and coaches in their organizations. You see here are the 10: building awareness, identifying motivators, identifying what your team members do well, creating development plans, developing new skills, getting back on track, building accountability, creating a positive performance review experience, even when you're giving negative feedback, recognition, and succession planning. When we miss a couple of these, we create the kinds of problems that Nancy, Alex, Bob experienced in their work. So the first one here is about building awareness. And in building awareness, what we need to do is look at what is star performance. What does it mean to be effective in your current role? And who decides what being effective is? What makes one person more effective than another, and why? So can we agree that being effective is meeting the goals or the key accountabilities for a role? When a position has clear accountabilities and goals, then measuring success and measuring effectiveness is possible. But when this does not happen, effectiveness is subjectively based on how the manager feels about the employee rather than what the position needs in order to drive the growth for the organization. I'm a big believer that we need to begin with clearly defined accountabilities for each role. So write down right now, what are the roles that report into you? What are the different titles that report into you? For each of them, I would encourage you to think about, ask the question, why does this position exist in our organization right now, this year, 2012? And what will this position be responsible for? What will the people who perform in this role really be held accountable for? What are their top 3, 5, 7 at the most accountabilities? By creating agreement about what effective performance looks like, sounds like, and rewards in each of the accountabilities, we can then raise awareness about the expectations for the individual person who's in the role. When we do this, we then create the possibility of being able to develop star performers. So sometimes people say to me, wait a minute, Shawn, what's a job benchmark? You've been talking about, or you're focusing on job benchmarks. Well, a job benchmark will show you what communication style best suits the work being done by the role. What motivators are naturally rewarded by the work that's done in the role, and what natural talents are necessary for success. You'll find in the book an opportunity to take an online assessment that gives you a job benchmark report showing you this information. We can also invite our bosses, our stakeholders, to create a job benchmark report on the role so that we can see exactly what they are expecting and we can identify where any differences in expectations exist. The foundation of a strong talent pool, in other words, the foundation of high-performing teams, is clearly defined and benchmarked jobs. So what causes work to be meaningful? What causes a team to say, wow, we are engaged, we are really making great things happen? According to Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers, the answer is autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward. People have to be able to see that there is a direct correlation between their effort, their work, and the reward that they are getting, what they're being recognized for. We can ensure that this happens when we create job benchmarks for each role that reports into us. So how do you do it? All right, here we go. To create a job benchmark, ask the key stakeholders to the role. In other words, some of the key people who depend on that role in order to get their job done. Ask them to agree on what the key accountabilities are. I will often lead these kinds of meetings for organizations and help them to facilitate identifying the 3, 5, or 7 key accountabilities for each of the core roles. And then put the accountabilities in priority order. As I mentioned, I have an online benchmarking assessment that you can get for free just by referencing the book. It's on page 20. So sometimes we end up seeing people who are in a personality conflict. Can you think of anybody in your organization who may be in a deep personality conflict? I've got a little story to share with you. Imagine this. The vice president of sales and the vice president of marketing don't necessarily interact with each other a great deal, but they meet occasionally. And they each have a very different expectation of a role that is 2 levels below them in the marketing organization. The sales VP thinks that that job is responsible for and is supposed to handle things in a certain way. But that is very different from what the other vice president is communicating to the team. And as a result, there is a trickle down in each of these organizations such that it ends out manifesting in a personality conflict between Tom and Bob. The VP of sales thinks that the role is supposed to be very outgoing, very customer focused, very externally driven, whereas the VP of marketing thinks that the role is primarily an implementer role and that it's not supposed to be interacting with customers on a day-to-day basis. As a result, Tom is out doing things with customers when Bob doesn't think he's supposed to be. And this conflict across these two departments has gotten so escalated that people think Bob and Tom hate each other, don't put them in a room together. But in fact, the issue wasn't really a personality conflict between Tom and Bob. The issue was that their positions were not benchmarked in a way that people really understood and agreed to what was expected of them. So what are your accountabilities and goals? Having clear accountabilities and goals is an indicator that someone is committed to creating momentum in their own life, in their own work. People who are most effective at work think and talk about their own goals, their department goals, every day. Are you a star performer in your role? Do you know what your key accountabilities are and how to move forward in them? And are you making sure that each of your team members is doing the same thing? I mentioned before the importance of a "that's for me" list. Helping your employees to stay aware of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and how it links up to what they want to create for themselves. Encourage them to create their own "that's for me" list after you've created yours. So I challenge you, I would love to hear from some of you about what you decide to put on your own "that's for me" list. One of the things I would encourage you to put on your "that's for me" list is to be surrounded by people who excel in what I call the 5 price of admissions competencies: personal accountability, goals orientation, continuous learning, interpersonal skills, and resiliency. If you're a manager who's responsible for hiring future leaders, hire people who already have these abilities so that you're not developing them, you're able to take them to the next level. But if you have a team of people and you realize there are some folks who are currently on your team who do not have these competencies to the level that you need them to be, then first focus it on developing them. Earlier in the introduction, I mentioned Angela. Angela had focused on developing herself and not on developing someone for her role, and as a result, she was not promoted into the VP role that she really wanted. She was devastated when she came to me about this, and so what we did was we created a job benchmark for the role that she was in. That enabled us to then identify 3 people in her large organization who had the greatest likelihood of being able to learn how to do her role. Over the course of a year, we were able to develop them and promote them so that they were ready for a broader role. And Angela then succeeded in being promoted into the vice president role. So how do you do this? Some phrases for starting a conversation for awareness. You could say something like, what makes you feel most excited in your current role? When you look at the key accountabilities for your role, which ones are you most excited about doing? If you're not loving what you're doing 80% of the time in your current role, let's talk about that and explore what the options might be to help you find a role that would be a better fit for you. What projects or tasks would you like the opportunity to explore if your natural talents are a good fit and you would fit nicely with that type of work? When people are engaged in their work and the team they are a part of, you can feel the difference. Do you notice that here? So these are some phrases that can help you as a manager to begin these kinds of conversations with your own team members. Something else that can help you in raising awareness for your team members is to be aware of the 7 career archetypes. In my thesis research, in my master's program at Penn, I identified, as a result of interviewing hundreds of leaders, 7 different career archetypes. Seekers are people who are looking for their next step. They're looking for someone to inspire them. Prodigies are high performers who are already doing very well and who are looking to continue to grow. Movers and shakers are making great things happen. They usually have a very large network and they know how to connect well with people. They know how to move things forward. They're very emotionally intelligent. Steady progressors are people who are happy in the role that they're in and they take a few steps to grow, and then they will stay there for a while and then they'll take a few steps to grow. Stabilized are people who are in the role they want to be in. They're not interested in moving. They're not interested in changing roles. And they may be in a life situation where perhaps they're taking care of young children or they're taking care of parents and they don't need or don't have capacity at this time in their lives for additional growth. And then finally, there's the checked out and going nowhere. I can guarantee you no one on the call today is in this group, but you may manage some people who are. On page 32 in the book Conversations for Creating Star Performers, you will find specific action steps on what to do with people who are in each of these 7 career archetypes. But I encourage you right now just to begin to think about how many seekers do you have on your team? How many prodigies do you have? How about steady progressors? By realizing the makeup of your team, you can begin to think about what you may need next. So I've got a little cartoon here for you. Who are you? Where are you in this cartoon? Are you riding the next wave and creating the future? Or are you waiting to be told what to do? Who do you want to have on your team? Well, who we want to have on our team is determined by our motivators. What drives us? So the second type of conversation that I teach people how to engage in is a conversation for identifying motivators. Star performers are people who have aligned their work to their values, to their motivators, so that they are passionate about what they're doing. Workplace motivators, are also called values, are the glue that keep people and organizations happily connected to each other. Understanding the values of the person or of the team, of the culture that you work in, will enable you to build rapport and create meaningful connections. I want to introduce you to 6 workplace motivators. So these 6 workplace motivators, we all have them, but we have them in varying degrees. So theoretical, wanting to answer facts, data, and truth. Seeking knowledge, wanting to solve problems. In the technical support department that I was a part of for many years, this was the predominant motivator that showed up in the culture. And so therefore, people, performers who had this value, this motivator, were highly engaged in the work. And people who didn't have the theoretical motivator were not as engaged. All right, the next one is utilitarian, wanting things to be useful and productive, seeking financial well-being, possibly using money or points to keep score. This value is all about practicality and return on investment. Traditional, wanting instructions or procedures so that life can be lived or work can be done correctly. Social, wanting to make a difference for others, wanting to solve problems and people challenges such as solving hate, poverty, homelessness, hunger, political issues. And then individualistic, wanting to be at the table when decisions are made, seeking to be a leader whose voice matters, and winning, being in a world-class organization. And then finally, aesthetic, wanting things to be harmonious, wanting things to feel good, look good, sound pleasing, artistic, creative, subjective. I'd like you to think about, what is your values hierarchy? What's the order that you would put these into? If you want an assessment that shows you your own hierarchy, I'd be happy to share one. Just reach out to me. When we understand our own individual as well as our organizational values, we can then begin to align the vision, the mission, and the values so that they match. When we see this happen in organizations, we see teams thrive. We see synergy. One of the goals as a manager, as a leader, is to make sure that we're putting motivators into action. You can create a conversation with people or with your team by asking these types of questions. How would you rank your motivators using the list of the 6 values that I just introduced you to? What does your values hierarchy reveal about your unique interests? Are your values being rewarded by the work you are currently doing? Together, let's explore how your values have motivated the choices that you've made about your work and your relationships with bosses, teams, peers, customers. And what additional assignments could you raise your hand for that would align to your values? So some additional phrases for starting this kind of conversation with people. Ask who inspires you and why. What about your current work makes you feel most alive and passionate about being here? What do you appreciate about this team? When you consider how you've spent your time and money over the past several months, what do you notice about how it reflects your values? In other words, are you living your values? When I took the time to really understand my own motivators and why I do what I do, it helped me to make decisions about the projects that I signed up for and about the career path that would be most fulfilling for me. I did this myself and then here you share your own story. Because by sharing your story about how you've done this, you will engage your team members, your followers to do the same. You could also ask, in past roles, what caused you to be motivated? And when you think about the next year and what we have on our to-do lists, what gets you jazzed up and excited? Identifying what your team members do well is the next type of conversation. So I'm really going to be sharing these 3 types of conversations with you out of the 10 today. So which of your skills do you most enjoy using? How do you imagine you will add value to our team? What types of assignments would most appeal to you? Would you give me some examples of projects you've worked on in the past that you were passionate about? How would you describe your own communication style and how it fits with or doesn't fit with your role? What motivates you? What are your developmental areas? That is, skills that you know you need to develop in order to perform well in this position. And what are you looking for from a manager? What did you appreciate most about your previous manager? You see, our goal is to make sure that your role plays to your natural strengths. I love this metaphor here because when we're managing high-performing teams, we have people in the right roles. Nobody feels like they're a square peg trying to be forced into a round hole. It's equally as important for your team members to understand your strengths as it is for you to understand theirs. You want team members who are willing and able to cover your blind spots. No one, none of us can be all things to all people. If we try to do so, we will burn ourselves out. So as a result, a really high-performing team understands that each person has a set of motivators, a communication style, and natural talents that will be unique. So how do we put ourselves in order? How do we divine our roles so that we cover each other's blind spots so that we're not resentful of when I might have to step in and add this because it's one of my strengths, but somebody else covers my blind spots. It's just like looking in the rearview mirror. Sometimes there are places in a car that have a blind spot, and if we don't know that we have a blind spot there, we can get ourselves into big trouble. Do you recall in the introduction I talked to you about Nancy? Nancy was one of the managers I introduced you to. I did a perceptual interview, 360 feedback process on Nancy as part of our coaching work together. And this is some of the feedback that Nancy received. She's got a great executive presence. She does really wonderfully at delivering presentations. She's confident. She offers her opinions. She adds direction and leadership. She makes decisions in a crisis. She's passionate about her area of focus. She has great financial acumen, and she's dedicated to her work. But as I talked to people over and over, I heard that Nancy needed to do more listening. She needed to be more flexible, engage, be respectful and approachable. And she needed to do less of defensiveness, annoyed body language, trying to prove that she already knew everything or that her past experience enabled her to solve the problems people were having in this organization. when we realized this feedback, what we knew was that Nancy needed to build a new strength. Nancy needed to build a new skill. And the developmental side of the conversation with Nancy focused on helping her to raise her own awareness of when she could listen more actively. So I asked her the question, Nancy, can you imagine yourself in a meeting listening by summarizing what you've heard, especially if it's complex or emotional in nature? Can you see yourself asking several sincere questions to gain more understanding and not put the other person on the spot? Would you be willing to take these 2 steps before you share your own opinions and reactions with others? So by me asking Nancy these questions, I got her to see exactly where she needed to tweak her own behavior in order for her to be effective. It's not uncommon for my coaching clients to ask me, okay, how long is it going to take me to do this? Well, it usually takes at least 30 days to integrate a new skill into our behavior. And so I encourage you to think about if there's a new skill that you want to master, how could you create a 30-day accountability process? Maybe you want to work with a colleague, a peer, or maybe you want to work with your boss. But recognize that we're talking about a scrambled egg phase here. You're going to go through the scrambled eggs as you move yourself to being able to master that new skill. And give yourself patience, give yourself flexibility as you go through the process in learning how to do that new skill. So before starting to coach someone on the 2nd or the 3rd skill in their development plan, I ask, are you ready to learn the new skill, or would you prefer to continue practicing the one that we've been working on until you've mastered it? You see, with Nancy, we had a list of a handful of skills that Nancy needed to develop in order for her to be more effective in her role. But if I bombarded her with all of those at one time, it wasn't going to work for her. She wouldn't be able to master the ones that were most important. And so what we did was we built a phased-in approach. For the first 30 days, Nancy focused solely on listening. Once Nancy was able to say, yes, I've mastered it, I've got it, I'm ready, then we could take on the next skill. So, some phrases for starting this type of conversation. Which skills or capabilities do you think you have already fully developed? What skills have you already focused on developing? How did you go about developing new abilities? When you look at the key accountabilities for your role, where will you need new skills in order to perform at a higher level? Developmental areas are the skills and the capabilities that we want to build in ourselves. It's best to focus on 1 or maybe 2 at a time. Which area do you think will be most important for you to focus on in the next 60 days? And blind spots are the areas in which we realize it would be very hard for us to develop capabilities. It may be better to delegate those to someone else on the team. When you reflect on your own accountabilities, are there any areas where you realize you have blind spots that may be tripping you and or the team up? You see, it is vital to align people's roles so that they're using their natural talents in the work they're doing. I heard Stephanie Trotter say that, and I went, amen, Stephanie, she gets it. I so agree. And the conversations that I'm showing you how to master here are vital in your ability to match people so that they can become star performers in your organizations. I love questions because questions are really the space where you get to focus the presentation on what's most important to you. So I would be delighted now to answer or think through any questions that you'd like to propose. And I also invite you, if you prefer to ask me a question online, to do so at the places you'll see here. ShawnKentHayashi.com is my blog. There's an opportunity there to ask me questions. And you can sign up for my free conversation tips emails and have your questions answered there as well. But right now, what are the questions that are out there, Greg?
Okay, you can all submit questions to the question panel of your GoToWebinar console, and we'll go ahead and address them. Let's see. One of them was sort of about getting started, having these conversations. How do you get started? When would you get started? During their, at the time of their performance review, or just kind of anywhere along the timeline of the year? So what have you seen there, Shawn?
Well, you've got to start. So if you're the manager, if you're the leader, you've got to start now wherever you are. So if you are at the beginning of someone's performance review cycle, I strongly encourage you to start with the key accountability process and do a job benchmark on the role so that it's very clear to the person in the role exactly what's expected of them. I also believe that it's important to hold regular check-in updates against how am I doing against these accountabilities. Steve Merrill was one of my very first bosses, and he did a fabulous job of this with me. When I arrived on the first day, he had my accountabilities ready to go. He asked me to meet with, over my first week, the key stakeholders to my job and to review my key accountabilities with them so that they would know what I had been told by my management was that I was responsible for in my role. And then each month, Steve and I would have a conversation with each other about how I was doing against the key accountabilities for my role. He'd ask me great questions. What's going well? What are you enjoying? What's tripping you up? Anything getting in your way? Where do you need my help? These kinds of questions showed me that Steve really cared about and wanted to support me. The next step in that is that about 6 months into the role, Steve then asked me to go back and talk to those key stakeholders again and take the accountabilities sheet and ask them, how am I doing against these accountabilities? What do you think? What do you need more of from me? What do you need less of from me? And by having those conversations with my key stakeholders, I had a check-in mark at 6 months so that I could then write a summary of what I realized about my own performance. And then at the end of the year, Steve would ask me to review, how did I think I've done? We did it in conversation first, and then he asked me to create a written summary of that. And then a few days later, he would meet with me to share his feedback, his reactions to my performance. It showed me that he was really listening. He was really taking my input and weighing it in his own experience and own evaluation of how I was doing. That process works. You can drop into that process no matter where you are in your annual review cycle. But I strongly encourage as managers that you really think through that. One of the conversation types that I cover in the book is conversations for reviews. So if you want more specific details on how to handle that aspect, feel free to check it out. Greg, what else?
Okay, well, there's another sort of follow-on to that is just, a question about, can you use these conversations during the hiring process as well?
Absolutely. I would strongly encourage you to use these. The more you start using these conversations, the better you'll begin to see that they fit in every aspect of your work life. When you understand what the values and the motivators that exist in your culture, you'll begin to see ways to recruit people who fulfill and match that values hierarchy. So I mentioned to you when I ran the technical support department, I realized that the theoretical motivator, the theoretical value, was the core that caused people to be connected to each other. And so as part of the interviewing process, we did a series of activities in interviews where I was looking to make certain that people really were motivated by theoretical problem solving. Because if they weren't going to be able to do the technical support work that needed to be done in that part of the organization. We had other parts of the organization where people didn't necessarily need theoretical as their top 1 or 2 motivators. And so I could steer people in that direction if it became clear to me that their values hierarchy was different from the job. So yes, begin to use these in hiring, use this in every phase of people development.
Okay, great. There was a question about how you differentiate accountability versus responsibility.
So in this context, they're probably very similar. Accountability is what will you hold someone accountable for? What will you hold them responsible for? And so we're really playing a semantics game probably if we try to get too nitty-gritty on it. But when I look at key accountabilities for a role, I want to make sure we're aligned across so that the person who the role is reporting into, the people who report into the role, and then the peers who are relying on that role all agree to the hierarchy of accountabilities or responsibilities that this person is being asked to do.
Okay. There's a number of questions about the assessments. How do you, or where can they get the assessments? Are they on your website or just referenced in the book? Or?
So I have 4 different assessments that I use at different phases, and you'll find them on my website, theprofessionaldevelopmentgroup.com. So that's T-H-E, theprofessionaldevelopmentgroup.com. And you'll find that there's a button there on assessments. If you click on that, you can find more detail. If you have specific questions, feel free to email me at Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, at theprofessionaldevelopmentgroup.com. You'll find the job benchmarking assessment in the book, Conversations for Creating Star Performers.
Okay, excellent. And then somebody asked, well, would you have your staff take some of these assessments?
Yes, absolutely. So when we do a job benchmark, it shows us clearly what the communication style is, what the workplace motivators are, and what the natural talents are that are needed from the role. And you can also have individuals take the assessments to understand what their preferred communication style is, what their values hierarchy is, and what their natural talents are. And then I have a gap report that shows the difference between the two, which enables you to create a professional development plan for people so that they naturally can grow in the role. Now, the fact is you don't have to have every person take the assessments. Just by doing the job benchmark, you'll begin to gain a lot more clarity about what you're really looking for. And the more comfortable you get with that, the better you will be at spotting it in people yourself. I teach people how to do what I call people reading. And people reading is really identifying what's somebody's preferred communication style, what are their motivators, and what are their natural talents. And to the degree that you master the ability to people read, you'll begin to spot who will fit well in these roles and what are these roles rewarding. You can begin to spot it yourself. Thank you for these questions.
Great. Oh, no problem. So also just a quick note for everybody, the slide deck and a link to the recording of the webinar will be provided to all registrants. And that'll be sent out later today. Let's see, there's another question about how would accountability be measured directly based on their achievement of KPIs that you've defined for their role?
It could be. It depends. Sometimes KPIs are written such that it doesn't necessarily reflect a role, but rather it reflects what a department is responsible for. So it just depends on how honed in you have those KPIs. But you would certainly use the KPIs to help guide what the accountabilities are for a specific role. Recently I was working with a customer service organization that had some KPIs, and it was clear to me that not all KPIs fit every one of the roles. Hopefully this is making sense what I'm saying here. So some roles had a higher weight or a higher ability to influence a KPI than another role did. So you'd want to have that distinguished very clearly.
Okay. There's another one that asks about how to deal with insubordinate, senior level, stability-minded employees that resist change, which is probably more complex of a question. But.
Well, and it's a question that is important for us to deal with. So how do you deal with performers who aren't meeting your expectations, right? In my other book, Conversations for Change, I show you how to create conversations for conflict, conversations for breakdown, and conversations for moving on when things aren't working. I guide you through a sequence of what to do when you realize you've got a performer who isn't living up to your expectations and what they need to change in order to meet the expectations. And then what you as a manager, as a leader, need to do so that you don't get hooked in it with them. So that's a vital skill for successful management. You'll also find examples like that in Conversations for Creating Star Performers as well.
Excellent. So if their roles don't or if their natural talents don't really match their role, is your advice to try to develop them or to try to move them into a different role?
Okay, so sometimes we will have a person whose natural communication style and workplace motivators fit the role, but they just don't have the competencies yet. And in that case, absolutely, do some training. Get them up to speed so that their specific skill set will enable them to do the job. But there are other situations where we find, like the Alex and Bob scenario that I shared with you. Alex was, I'm going to use a metaphor with you. Imagine for a moment a dogwood tree. Can you see a dogwood tree in your mind? A small, short little tree. It's known for its ability to bloom and has these great blossoms on it in the springtime. Now imagine it standing next to a very tall blue spruce, a pine tree that's huge. If we started saying to the dogwood tree, you can grow, you can become a blue spruce. I want you to become a blue spruce. Here's what it's going to take. I want you to start growing green needles. Of course, we laugh at the absurdity of this. And yet sometimes as managers, we don't understand how to people read. We don't understand the patterns of behavior and motivators and how they impact what someone can grow into. And this is what I mean when I say we need to be really good people readers, because there's a communication style, for example, an implementer style of communication. This person will be really good at project management. They'll be great at identifying tasks and creating project plans and moving things forward. They will be extremely task-oriented, but they won't be people-oriented. They are not going to be highly empathetic. They're not going to be people who are interested in long sort of listening to and working through people problems. So that would be the equivalent of trying to take a dogwood tree and turn it into a blue spruce. So your ability to understand that about how people are wired is really useful so that you can distinguish, are we in one of these situations where I'm trying to take a square peg and force it to be in a round hole? Or am I creating a role that will really suit who this person happens to be? I'm a big believer in do the latter. Make sure you know what the positions are on your team, how they benchmark, and then put the right people in those roles.
Excellent. Thank you, Shawn. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Shawn, we really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with the audience. And just to let everybody know that our next webinar session will be on March 15th, and that's titled The Secrets of Service Account Management. So thank you all for coming, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Greg. It was great to be with you again.